You have come to my sabbatical stories. I had the incredible privilege to go on sabbatical from January to April of last year and travel to different countries. As a biologist, one of the things that drove me to be a biologist and what I love about being a biologist is the Earth's biodiversity and falling in love with all these different species that we share the planet with. And the other side of that coin is the heartbreaking piece of starting to recognize that not all species on the planet are doing as well as humans as far as population size. So I was also interested, one, I was excited to see biodiversity firsthand, and secondly, was interested to see what different countries are doing as far as our conservation efforts are concerned. So I planned this amazing sabbatical, and I'm going to start with my thank you slide. And a big thank you to Columbia College and the district for saying yes to this sabbatical idea. And when I came home, worked really closely with the College Foundation and our Tuolumne County Superintendent of Schools on a project that extended the sabbatical. Many of you came to the Madagascar talk where we were able to bring Gerard Bakara-Zafi from Madagascar, who works for the national parks, and we started a sister schools project with our high schools, and we're working on basically a ranger internship program for Madagascar high school students in their local national park. So we're continuing to work on this project, and that was all made possible from our college and our Tuolumne schools. So this picture up here is Gerard speaking with some of our high school students. And the rest of these pictures are amazing people we met while we were there. And one of the big lessons from the sabbatical was meeting people who understand their own place and are connected to it and have a passion for it immediately gives you a deeper connection to where you're at. And we were fortunate that we met, everywhere we went, we met people who were excited and passionate about the place they lived and wanted to share that with us. And so, although they're not here, I wanted to send my thank you out to all of them that made this trip incredible. And then, Lisa Murphy is my wife, and she came on sabbatical with me. She planned the sabbatical with me, and so this talk is dedicated to her, and it's because of her that this sabbatical was an absolutely life-transforming experience that made me realize that I could not only just appreciate the world's biodiversity, but I could do something to save it. And I feel like from this project, we've been able to work towards that. So thank you for that. She's also an amazing travel partner, and she took care of me the 4 days I had heat exhaustion, so that was amazing too. People ask me, how was my sabbatical? This is my favorite picture to describe how it went. It was a hair-raising experience. It was incredible, and changed our lives, and we had an incredible time, so I wanted to share that with you. This is our planet. It's our home. It's an incredible place. One of the hard things for me to think about is I love all the humans I know. I'm excited when my friends have babies. It's a really exciting time, right? We fall in love with these new humans that we share the planet with. But at the same time, in the next hour, by the end of this talk, we will increase the number of humans on this planet by about 8,600 people. And that happens every hour. And as our population increases in our size, as much as we all love each other, right, we take more resources, and we're taking places that from all the other species that share our planet as home. And one of the things I've become really more aware of from this trip and more passionate about is making sure that other species have a space too, because like it wouldn't be the same home without all of them as well, right? So here are some of them. Here we go. First up was Tanzania, which is on the eastern side of Africa. And when you get there, you get greeted by a very lovely jambo, which is Swahili for hello. And Tanzania is an incredible country, and all those green spots are national parks. So there are several national parks in Tanzania, and we spent all of our time in the northern end of Tanzania in 5 national parks: Serengeti, Ngorongoro, Arusha, Lake Manyara, and Tarangire. And so some big lessons we learned from Tanzania. Step 1, cage the humans and protect the ecosystem. So we got to spend 2 weeks on safari in these 5 national parks, and it was incredible. You get up in the morning, you grab your binoculars, you have a little bit of breakfast, you get in the car, and they get to the spot, you pop the top of the Land Cruiser, and that's how you spend your day watching things. And what this does is you feel safe, and then the animals are well aware that that car is going to stay on the road and nothing's going to come out and harm it, so they are able to do what they do naturally. So you get to see a lot of natural behavior. And these elephants we pulled up and the elephant herd kind of came and grazed by us and then eventually moved by. So it leads to some incredible moments. Here's another one. Something's going on. When you pulled up to a spot like this and you saw you didn't normally see so many cars in one spot. But if you look carefully in that tree, you'll see those guys. So this was in Tarangire National Park, where lions usually do not hang out in trees. They're usually hanging out in the grass or crops of rocks. But in this park, the ground has traditionally been pretty wet. And so the thought is they're either trying to escape mosquitoes, or it has also a lot of biting ants, so maybe they're trying to escape those, or they just don't like being wet. We're not sure. But for generations, these lions have hung out in the trees, and these in particular seem to be entertained by watching the tourists drive by. Like, what do you want to do today? I don't know, let's go watch the tourists. Could I eat that one? I don't know. Okay. So we got to see incredible things like that, and then sometimes you were caged inside. So this was our camp in Serengeti, and what you can see is us watching these elephants came in, and they have learned that there's a water tank there, so they'll come in and they stick their trunks in the water tank and they drink from the water tank. And as they were coming in, we were kind of all spread out, and then we were told by our guides, like, get in the dining room, which is where we're standing, so you can stay safe and the elephants can do what they do. Tanzania has gotten really good at enforcing anti-poaching laws. So this happened this year. This woman is known as the Ivory Queen. She is from China, and she was responsible for shipping, they have documented at least 700 elephant tusks illegally into China. So this year she was arrested, and she has now received a sentence of 15 years in prison and a handy fine. What really impresses me about this story is Tanzania found her, prosecuted her, and China supported the sentence. They said, yeah, we agree, she should receive that sentence. So you're starting to see these international efforts of countries recognizing the issues that poaching faces upon things like elephants and rhinos, and these laws are starting to be supported internationally, which is really incredible. All of that leads to these incredible moments. So I fell in love with birds in Tanzania. They're ridiculously colored, and then you come home and you start to research, like, why are all the birds in warm and tropical places magnificently colored? And people have lots of hypotheses, and none of the evidence supports any of the hypotheses, so we still don't know, which is kind of better. So there's incredible birds. One of my favorites, there's a whole group of birds in Africa that are called weaver birds. And the males weave the nests. The males are also more brightly colored than the females, so the males are making the homes for where they can lay their eggs, and then the females, once they come by, they check out the nest. If they like the nest, they stay. If they don't like the nest, then he builds another one and sees how round 2 goes. So this was incredible. This was actually just outside the outhouse, the bathroom of one of our camps in the Serengeti. And so there were a couple afternoons that we were there in the heat of the day, and so we got to sit down and just watch this bird make its nest. It's just stunning. Yeah. And not all the birds are small. So there were lots of really big vultures around, hornbills, and then this one on the bottom is called a secretary bird. And it makes its living by stomping on snakes. So it has these really strong legs, kicks the snakes, and then eats them. The other thing we learned about buzzards, there are several species of buzzards that live in Africa, and what the ecologists are learning about buzzards is they actually work together, that when they find a dead carcass, they all have different shaped beaks that give them different abilities to get into the carcass. So there's one particular vulture that has a really sharp beak that's good at, like, slicing through the skin. So once one species finds a carcass, they kind of call in the species that can slice it open, and then they kind of coordinate their efforts in eating the carcasses. And then there are lots of wonderful herbivores, right? Africa's known for these huge herbivores. We got to see a lot of them. One of our favorites were the zebras. We got there just at the beginning of the season where the zebras were starting to give birth. So we got to see lots of baby zebras, which, like, you don't get tired of watching baby zebras walk around at all. And what we learned about baby zebras is they're really fuzzy, and they're not black and white, they're brown and white. And as they age, those brown stripes become blacker, and I think the brown stayed fuzzier longer than the white, so the white calms down, and then you have these really brown fuzzy stripes that come up. And then zebras do a lot of this behavior. They kind of flick their tails and get the flies off of each other's faces, and maybe it just feels nice. Sure, makes for a cute picture. Another incredible thing about Tanzania is you're driving down the road and you're not just seeing one species at a time, that these grazers are integrated with each other. So at any time you would see zebras hanging out with giraffes. And part of the reason why they can do that is because they're actually, even though they're grazers, they're eating different things. So the giraffes are specialists in eating acacias, which is quite a thing to do. Up here on the left, that's a zoomed-in picture of an acacia tree, and those are pretty gnarly thorns to deal with as a giraffe. But they've got the tongues and the mucus to deal with it. And then zebras tend to eat the longer grass, and so they hang out together. That helps them avoid predators, as you have more things being alert out in the savannah. And of course, where there are herbivores, there are carnivores. There are 6 different species of cats in Tanzania. We saw 4 of them. So this is a lion up on the top. That's a serval cat. A couple of cheetahs. We also saw leopards. But a behavior we saw a lot was these cheetahs are actually sitting on top of a termite mound. So these termites build these huge mounds, and they get up above the grass. And so it gives a really nice perching spot to watch the savanna and the plains and the grass. And so you saw a lot of animals using those termite mounds as perching spots. So this is my favorite moment with the carnivores. There was a group of lions that had been sunning themselves up on this dirt berm. And the dirt berm is there to try and reduce erosion that comes down onto the road. So it's, 50, 60 feet or so away from the road. And they had all been lined up and sunning on this berm, and it had been in the morning. The sun was getting hot, and they were transitioning into the shade of this tree. And so as we stopped and watched them, they got up and started wandering through the shade of this tree, and the grass is tall enough. Once they get to the shade of the tree, they just they disappear. Like, you would never know that they were there if you hadn't seen them flop into the grass. So that was incredible. But the last one to get up and move was this guy. And you can see he's got a few scars. It's his young male, because his mane's not quite in yet. As the lions age, their manes get larger. So it took him a while to stand up. And once he did, he started walking. And then we really got to see what kind of shape he was in. And it took him quite a while to walk from that berm over to the shade. But watching that, you realize this guy cannot get his own food. And so we often think of if you can't get your own food, you're not going to survive, right? You're kind of on your own. But yet here's a pack of lions that are clearly taking care of this injured lion. Somehow he's getting food, and the end of this, I didn't video this part, but it was incredible. So he walks over into the shade. As he gets into the shade, you see this head pop up of another lion. They greet each other. They do this little nose-to-nose nuzzle, sweet little moment, and then he plops into the grass. And our guide, I was talking to Lisa about this as we were watching this again, and she reminded me that our guide had said that they probably moved into the shade while we were there, because we, as big vehicles, probably might have given this lion a little more protection, that he wasn't going to get attacked by anything, while the likelihood was less while we were there watching that. So it gave him a little safety to move into the shade. So that was an incredible thing to see, that that they're not abandoned, that they're cared for by their pack. These are wildebeest being pursued by a cattle egret that's trying to pick up any insects that are flipping up as they walk. But I love watching the wildebeest walk. Their heads just, I don't know what it's like to walk through the world with your head kind of flipping around like that. But this was a common sight too. We often saw wildebeest hanging out with zebras. This is the Serengeti Plain. It's called the Endless Plain. It just goes for miles and miles and miles of just grass. And once in a while you'll see a tree, but it's just this really long grassy plain. Part of the reason why that's just a really long grassy plain and no trees is there's a hard pan and then just a little bit of soil. So the only thing that can really survive on there is the grass, which is really great if you're a wildebeest or a zebra, because that means there's an area for lots of food for you. So the wildebeest are part of this famous migration that they circle around in and around the Serengeti National Park every year. And we were staying in this lower section in the southern Serengeti and the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. And this area right through here is known as the Short Grass Plains, and it's also the calving area for the wildebeest. So every year they make this annual migration, and they come to the southern part to have their calves. And they come in the millions. And we had expected to see millions. Like, you've probably seen those pictures and videos where it's just like endless wildebeest. We didn't see that because the rains were late that year, so they hadn't arrived yet. But what I learned is that the wildebeest and the zebras actually migrate together. So not only were we seeing a few of them together, maybe they were the early comers, I'm not sure, but the reason why they migrate together is, one, they eat slightly different foods. So the zebras like the taller, coarser grass, and as they munch that down, that lets the new grass grow, and it's softer and shorter, and that's what the wildebeest prefer. So they have this symbiotic relationship in their eating patterns. And they're also known, the wildebeests are known for their incredible smell of water. So they can smell rain for miles and miles and miles away. But as our guides told us, they have a horrible memory. So they can smell the rain, but they can't really remember where they're supposed to go, or where the safest river crossings are, or that if there was a predator that they saw 10 minutes ago, they've kind of forgotten about it because that was so 10 minutes ago. But the zebras are supposed to have a much better memory for all of that. So the two of them together, I don't know what it is, but somehow the wildebeest gives the sign of like, hey, I smell rain, we should go. And the zebra's like, okay, follow me. So they migrate together, which is pretty incredible, as they loop around. This picture here is actually taken inside of the Ngorongoro crater, which is an old volcano, which is now this big grassland, and there's also a salty lake in there. But the whole crater is about 12 miles across, and it's an old volcano. It's no longer active, but it's part of the story of why this grass is here and why this is such a great place for the wildebeest and the zebras to have their babies. Right? It's all part of this rift system where this eastern side of Africa is ripping apart and away from the rest of Africa, and that leads to a lot of volcanic activity. This is the only active volcano in Tanzania. It's called Oldonyo Lengai, which means mountain of the god. And it's an active volcano. Its last big eruption was 2007 to 2008. It kind of erupted sporadically for about a year. And what's incredible about the ash that comes out of this volcano is it's really rich in lots of minerals. So sodium, potassium, calcium, that then as these ash plumes go up into the air, they have found ash from this volcano 60 miles away from its center, right? So the ash comes out, blows around, and then fertilizes the soil, and that's what makes the grass so nutritious for these baby wildebeest. So they think that's part of the reason why they've evolved to drop their calves in this one spot, is because it produces this grass that allows those wildebeest to survive. This picture is also taken on the outskirts of a Maasai village. The buildings in the foreground are not homes. Those are government buildings. I think one's a ranger station, and one might be the medical clinic. But the Ngorongoro Conservation Area is the only conservation area in Tanzania where people live on the conservation area. In the 1950s, when the country started moving towards making the Serengeti National Park, there were people living there, and a lot of them were Maasai, but when they made the national park, they moved the Maasai off of that land. So some of them went north and some of them went south, and they were allowed to continue living in the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. And so we were able to spend 2 or 3 days in this Maasai village. One of our guides had grown up there. We're actually friends with him. He now lives in Yosemite National Park, but he goes home every year to his village to visit his family and to help that community to thrive. This is what's called a boma, which is a traditional house of the Maasai. It's got one entry point, one door, and no windows. So the only light you have in there is there's a fireplace in the middle where you get a little bit of light. They're not hunters, so the way they subsist is they have cattle, mostly cows and some goats, and their primary diet is the blood of the cow and the milk of the cow. So this picture right here is one of the Maasai warriors. That arrow has a very short tip to the blade, and as he goes close range with that arrow, he's with incredible accuracy going after the jugular vein of that cow, and then they'll fill that container up with milk, fill it up with blood, and then they make sure the cow stops bleeding. They'll bleed a cow. This cow won't be bled again for several weeks, 6 weeks, thanks. But they either just drink the blood or sometimes they'll mix it with milk, and that's a large component of their traditional diet. So they're not hunting any of the wild animals, but having cattle means that your cattle are eating the grass of the native animals. And so it's one of the challenges that Tanzania has, that here's this society, part of their society are these people that want to live off the land. They have a really rich culture, but there's this conflict between their traditional way of life and food for things like zebras and giraffes and all those herbivores. So it's one of the challenges that Tanzania is currently working on. We had an incredible few days with them. So now we're going to go to Madagascar. This was our second stop. So, and the greeting in Madagascar is Balatsara. So Madagascar is this island off of Africa. It's part of Africa, but it's an island nation. And what drew us to Madagascar was, one, it's high on biodiversity, and secondly, we're able to find, we're with the Madagascar Research Conservation Institute, which takes volunteers to do conservation work. And that was really exciting for me to get my hands in on field research for conservation. So we stayed in northern Madagascar on this tiny little island. So this would be mainland Madagascar. Here's our little island that we stayed on for 6 weeks. Our flight landed here, just outside of Hellville, and then you take a ferry ride, which is, depending on the weather, anywhere between a half an hour and 40 minutes to take a boat over to the island that we stayed on. So it's an old volcano, and this is a sizable little village, and then our camp was somewhere around in here. There's no cars on the village. If you get anywhere, it's by foot, which was pretty fantastic. Here's downtown, and that's a bunch of shops. And that's a typical kitchen where people cooked outside and cooked off of charcoal. So here we are in our camp. That's the dining room up on the top, and then we stayed in these huts. Inside the hut is 3 sets of bunk beds. And we shared that hut with this little green gecko on the bottom. Several of them, actually, but they were pretty fantastic. And one of the projects we were on was forest conservation. So we spent our days hiking through the island and looking, we did some lemur behavior studies and also looked for lots of different types of reptiles, which was pretty fantastic. For the lemurs, we actually met a woman who was doing her master's degree on the lemurs, and she was looking at internal parasites of the lemurs. And what she found was that lemurs that were close to villages and interacted with people on a regular basis or were fed by people on a regular basis had much higher levels of internal parasites than lemurs that were in national parks that didn't get fed by tourists, which, as we'll speak of soon, right, is another reason why these national parks, these places of refuge, are really critical for the species that live there. There was no power, so we had limited electricity and no Netflix. It's amazing what you can get done in your life without any Netflix. So when we weren't out on forest transects, this is what I was doing. Part of my sabbatical was to improve my nature journaling. So this is some pictures from our nature journaling. This is inside one of the huts. And this is a picture of walking the trails on the island. Super green, super lush, amazing views. But then you look a little bit closer where you're at, and there are lots of spots that were pretty degraded like this. And where it wasn't cleared, this had been cleared, probably there was a new house that was just above it, but this was probably also cleared for agriculture. And we realized as we hiked this entire island that the entire island was agroforestry. So lots of plants, but none of them were native. They were either mangoes or papayas or pineapples or bananas. But everybody was growing food either to eat directly or to sell as vanilla beans or coffee or cocoa. And when we went to the main island, we got to do that a little bit, right? And we saw similar stuff, which was it's hard to see that and understand the complexity of it, right? That there's an island, they're impoverished and trying to figure out how to survive and make a living. As these forests get degraded, it impacts these guys. This is a turtle track out into the ocean. There's our hawksbill turtle. So Madagascar beaches are places where different species of turtles are nesting. So we happen to be there during nesting season, which starts in January and goes till about February. And they come in and are looking for a place in the sand where they can dig, lay their eggs, and then go back into the ocean. And the thing about your nest is you need it to be above the high tide line. If it's not above the high tide line, then the eggs get washed out and they drown or they get washed away. So that nest has to be above the high tide line. One of the issues that was being faced on this island and other places is the erosion of sand. So if you take away the forest above you, then you've got higher erosion. Higher erosion above you causes the sand to disappear on your beach. Compounded with construction, so what you can see, that turtle trail goes in between piles of rocks. And so those are rocks that have been hand-hewed building stones for use on the island. While we were there, in a 10-15 minute walk between this turtle beach and where our camp was, we saw 4 little boutique hotels going up. So the incredible thing about tourism is tourists love turtles. And so now turtles are under protection to make sure that, right, there's this draw for turtles. So there's definitely an understanding now that turtles need to be protected, and it's now illegal to hunt them and eat them. However, people really like that ocean view when they're on vacation, right? So these beachside boutique hotels are really, on the island we were at, were just exploding. But what that's doing is it's also making it so there's less sand for these turtles to lay their nests. So one of the projects we worked on was tending turtle nests, which is pretty amazing. So when a turtle would come up and either couldn't get above the high tide line because of building or because there's also this invasive grass that they can't dig through the grass, the roots are too thick, Then, sometimes the turtles would just nest anyway. So they would dig their nest, and as they would lay their eggs, if the group had heard about it, it takes a while for a turtle to dig a nest, then the group from the camp would make that 10, 15-minute walk to this beach, and they would be ready and waiting for the turtle to drop its eggs. And as it dropped its eggs, they would carefully pick them up and put them in basically a plastic wash tub that had a bunch of holes on the bottom and the sides, and place them really carefully, and then took the eggs and put them above the high tide line and dug down into the sand the same depth that the turtle had dug, and filled it back up, and then put a sign on it and the date on it, and then waited. And it takes about 60 days for turtle eggs to hatch. And we were fortunate enough that one of those nests hatched while we were on the turtle project. So one Friday afternoon, it was raining. We're like, Lisa just had a feeling. She's like, I think we need to go check the turtle nest. And so we did, and sure enough, there were the turtles. So they're able to communicate with each other chemically, hormonally, so they all start, they hatch at different times underneath the sand, but then they all start digging up at about the same time. And so there were 80 turtles that came out of that nest. We measured some of them because we're trying to make sure that as they're moving these nests, there's not a great protocol for how to do that. So how do you do this in a way that maximizes the number of turtles that survive that transport? So it's a pretty magical moment, being able to hold a baby sea turtle and see 80 of these guys just scrambling to get into the ocean. They were in this bin, and if you are the ocean, all these baby turtles were like on this side of the bin. They just have this incredible instinct to like get into the water. And so once they'd all been counted and we'd measured 10 of the 10 that we needed to measure, then off into the ocean they went. Yeah, she was incredible. So this young girl actually lived with her family, and her dad had been hired to watch the turtle nest to make sure that they didn't get poached. And anytime any turtle event happened, she was there. So we absolutely thought she was fantastic and hope that she will become the next turtle researcher and advocate for Madagascar. So it was incredible to watch these. They swim into the ocean. As they finished swimming in, we got to jump into the ocean and watch the last of them kind of swim out with the current, and hoped that they all live long, wonderful lives. And then the flip side of that was pretty hard. So the other part of that research was counting the turtles that didn't make it. So there were a number of turtles that either got out of their eggs but weren't able to, for whatever reason, dig their way out, or a lot of them hadn't fully developed yet. They still had their yolk on them. So, but it's better than it would have been if that nest had stayed below tide. None of them were survive. But that, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see that not everything gets to make it. But they're collecting their data, and they're hoping to improve the odds as much as possible. Yeah, thanks for that. It is, and with climate change, that's one of the issues that there's a concern, that the ratio of males and females will get skewed, and that as temperatures rises, there are more and more females and fewer males. And that's one of the questions about impacts of climate change, as well as if that sea level continues to rise and there's less sand, right? There's less and less space for these turtles to nest. Our other job, which was a really hard one, was we'd get up in the morning and go snorkeling and take videos of turtles that were using the seagrass and the coral reef in front of our camp. They were trying to get an idea. They have a protected coral reef and seagrass right in front of the camp, and they were trying to get an idea of how many turtles use that space, and do the turtles spend the whole year there, or are they spending part of their year there? So our job was to very carefully learn how to approach a turtle without disturbing its feeding, which you can actually do. We got pretty good at that. At the end, you could dive down, take a video of this side of the face, and then swim over and get a video of this side of the face, and it would just keep munching coral or seagrass. And what we learned was those scales on the side of the turtle are unique to every individual. It's like your face, right? You could recognize you by your face. Same thing with the turtles. So then what we would do then is you would take these images and then compare it to all the other turtles that they've ever seen and see if it's a match. And that was really fun. Sometimes it matched, sometimes we got to name a new turtle. So trying to get an idea of how turtles use this space and how to help their nests survive. The good news is there was a great article in National Geographic this fall about turtles, and they think they're actually pretty resilient. If we can just help them a little bit, we think they'll be okay, but they do need some help. So the big lesson in Madagascar was that a refuge is required. That when you have people that need to use resources, if there's not a place that is protected from people needing to use resources or change a habitat, it's just not going to be saved. And so the one place we went to where there was a old growth forest was Lukobe National Park. And this is a picture of us with Gerard, who came to our campus in October. And he works for Lukobe National Park and is in charge of developing sustainable ecotourism there. So what they're hoping is to get enough tourism to support and fund the park, but to make sure it maintains that incredible old growth of the forest. And this was a magical place to visit after seeing so many places that no longer had their primary forest. This place was just magical. It's the only way I can describe it. Our last stop is Australia. So Tasmania is also known for its incredible biodiversity, and we thought we'd choose a place that wasn't so hot. We were ready. So this is how we felt about Tasmanian forests. So what's incredible about Tasmania is it's a state of Australia, and it had low populations for a long time. And partly due to that, and partly due to some foresight, about 40% of Tasmania is under protection in some way. And they have these incredible old growth fern forests and birch forests and eucalyptus forests. So we got to walk through places that look like this, incredible places. So we were driving down the road, and I said, Lisa, did you see that echidna? She's like, no, pull over. I was like, I'm working on it. So we pulled over, and there's this echidna that was walking along the side of the road and then started walking across the road, which it doesn't do very fast. And so Lisa kind of sheltered it and made sure it didn't get run over as it was walking across the road. And once it got on the other side of the road, it very happily started eating more ants. And so we got to spend a few minutes with this echidna before it disappeared through a fence. So two things about that experience was, one, I learned that echidnas, its back foot is backwards, which I didn't know, and they're diggers, and so the thought is they've evolved so that their front feet can dig, and while their front feet are digging, their back feet are also flipping dirt out, so they can just dig straight down into the dirt, and they like to eat lots of ants. And one of the big issues for Tasmania is roadkill, that because they have so much wildlife still there, they come out at night, and people are out at night, and they often see a lot of roadkill on the side of the road. Wombats. I didn't even know they existed before we left. I'm like, what's a wombat? Really? What is this thing? Could it get more adorable? So this wombat on the bottom we actually saw out in the wild. This is where they're found, in these tufted grassy areas. So this is a mom and her young who stayed pretty close to her. And they are also burrowing animals. And what we learned about these is they're marsupials, but unlike the kangaroos, right, where the pouch is this direction, the burrowing marsupials, the pouch is the other direction. So when you're digging, you're not like throwing a bunch of dirt in with your poor little Joey. Pretty cool. So they have a reverse pouch, And then wombats actually also have, their backside has this big cartilaginous plate. Like you could, if you touched it and you kind of knocked on it, it just feels like this big bone. And basically what that serves as a door to their burrow. So they'll burrow in if they they burrow a lot, but then if they're feeling threatened, they get into their burrow, and then the baby goes in first, and then that back end of that wombat just serves as this door of cartilaginous plate. So here's the big lesson from Tasmania. Make the right thing easy. So everywhere we went, it was really clear where they wanted you to go. Stay on this trail, because this is pretty fragile habitat. So what they did is they have this incredible trail system where you're basically walking on duck boards or some kind of raised trail that protects the ecosystem, and it makes it really easy to walk through it. And you don't want to go anywhere else because that's so easy. And then this is a 6-day backpacking trip called the Overland Trek, which is just incredible. And everywhere you stopped, they also had huts or little places to put your tents. So it was really clear, kind of concentrate the humans in one spot, make it really easy to do the right thing. And everywhere we went, there were lots of volunteers and opportunities for education. So this is one of the women we met on the trail who just had this rich knowledge of plants and the place we were at. So we asked her one question, and then she talked to us for about an hour. It was really amazing. So we learned a lot from her. And she was a volunteer there, and she said it was actually really competitive to get that position for the summer to hang out. And she was just there for a week at one of the huts. And then this is in the outhouse. So everywhere you go, there's like these, oh, you're going to sit here for a second? Let us give you an educational opportunity. Out on the track, right, so they tell you about how to poop in the woods, basically. And then Tasmanians have these great senses of humor. So this is, they always had poems, and this one's about Tasmanian devil turds, and then there were ones about wombat poop. So it was this nice mixture of humor and learning stuff everywhere you went. Little fairy penguins. So on the northern shore of Tasmania, there's a rookery for these fairy penguins. They're the smallest penguins on the planet. So they have to protect this rookery, and people want to come and see them, including us. So what they've done is they've built this raised platform to keep the humans up there while the penguins do their thing. And then there are parts of the beach you're just not allowed to go on. So they have part of the beach where you can view them, and then part of the beach where the penguins just get to do their thing. And then that was also full of signage, and we met volunteers. So during the nesting period and the molting period, which is while we were there, every night there are these 2 volunteers that are there talking to people and making sure that the penguins are safe and that people get their questions answered. And then they have some pretty incredible wildlife sanctuaries in Tasmania. We wanted some up-close and personal encounters. And so this is Toronto Wildlife Sanctuary, rehabilitates animals. So with those roadkill, what we learned, what Lisa was looking for at any moment as we were driving, was that that if there is a joey inside the pouch of a marsupial and that marsupial gets killed, that joey can actually live for quite a while, even if the mother has died. So if you are ever in Tasmania or Australia and you are driving and you see roadkill on the side of the road, you should, if it is safe, pull over, check the pouch. If there's a joey in the pouch, take it out, warm it up, and take it to your local wildlife sanctuary. There's your PSA for when you go to Australia. So they did a lot of education at the wildlife sanctuary, and they're rehabilitating animals that were either injured or their parents were affected by, right, they were found in the pouch of a parent that had died. And they also have Tasmanian devil program. So the Tasmanian devil is now the largest carnivore in Tasmania. It used to be the Tasmanian tiger, but that's gone extinct due to overhunting and habitat loss. And so Tasmanians are pretty passionate about making sure that the Tasmanian devil survives. What the Tasmanian devil is facing right now is cancer. So it's a facial tumor that's contagious. And the bummer about that is that's how Tasmanian devils interact with each other. If they want to say hello to each other, they bite you on the face. That's just how it works. So, the cancer is actually was a mutation that happened out in the wild, But as these devils have transferred this cancer, so it's one of the few cancers that's actually contagious, from one to another, it really started to decimate the Tasmanian devil populations. And so what they've done is there's captive breeding programs. And so all of these Tasmanian devils that are in the wildlife sanctuary are actually chipped, and they have taken samples from them and they sequence their DNA. So they have an idea of the genetic diversity within their wildlife sanctuary, and that bank is then shared with another wildlife sanctuary. And so when they're ready to breed, they actually make sure that they're trying to increase and maintain the genetic diversity within the devils that are in captivity. Meanwhile, out in the wild, they're trying to figure out how do we suppress this cancer. The good news that came out while we were there that they talked about was that the devils that are out in the wild are starting to show some resistance to the cancer. So some of them are surviving the cancer, and they think that it will pass. So the hope is that once the cancer's kind of worked through the natural population, that they'll have a large enough captive population with a large enough genetic diversity that they can release those back into the wild, and the Tasmanian devil will survive, which is awesome. All right, our last stop was the Great Barrier Reef. So we were on Lady Elliot Island, which is the southernmost tip of the Great Barrier Reef, and we really debated about whether or not we were going to go to the Great Barrier Reef because we'd been to several places snorkeling where you're just like, man, this coral reef is just not in good shape, and we can't handle going to the Great Barrier Reef and crying for 5 days. But that's not what happened. So we talked to some friends, and they said, you will have this incredible experience if you go to Lady Elliot Island. So we did. So this is Lady Elliot Island. You can see the runway. It's very small. It takes about 10, 15 minutes to walk the width of the whole island. It's a bird sanctuary. So this island is old coral that's now above sea level, and then birds started using it as a safe place to breed, and as they came and pooped, the guano holds all of that coral together, and over centuries it became this island. Because of all that guano, it was actually mined for years, and they took feet of guano and coral off of this island. But at some point in Australia's past, they decided actually that we need to return this into a bird sanctuary. And so the guano mining left, and now it's bird sanctuary as well as an eco-tourist spot. And so we got there, and the first sign we saw was, welcome to bird season on Lady Elliot Island. For your comfort, earplugs are located in the top drawer of your bedside table should you require them. So there were 30,000 pairs of birds breeding on the island when we were there, which is incredible. And they squawk all day long, all night long. Dusk and dawn, they squawk the most, but it was pretty incredible to see all these birds use this island as a refuge. And what was impressive about Lady Elliot Island was that they prioritized the ecosystem. So even though the tourists were there were lots of rules about what you could and couldn't do, and when you could go in the water, and when you couldn't go in the water. And what we saw was everybody, they were like, yeah, we want this, we want to be here and see these incredible things, but we don't want to do any damage to it. And so people complied with all of those rules, which was great to see. So this is us in our snorkeling gear. This is our tactic of not having any sunscreen. Worked really well for us. And this is one of the turtles we saw. So we had some really phenomenal experiences. Oh, and they also had a huge educational program, so we learned a lot. Every night there was a lecture. This is Dr. Kathy Townsend. She was there while we were there, so she gave 2 lectures while we were there. One was on manta rays and one was on sea turtles. And so they just, everywhere you went in Australia, it felt like there was an opportunity to learn something really deeply. And they also have a really successful citizen science program that's helping them to understand manta rays. So throughout Australia, if you are a scuba diver and you have a camera, you're asked to take a picture of the manta ray, send it to the citizen science program, and then they're able to understand how manta rays, how big the manta ray population is and how they're using the Great Barrier Reef and the coastlines of Australia. So this is what the lagoon looked like, right? Standing out on the beach, out onto the lagoon. And our pictures just couldn't possibly capture the aquarium-like feel you had as you dove into this, as you snorkeled in this water and were just surrounded by hundreds of different species of fish. But one of my favorite moments was we were swimming, and Lisa said, "Did you see the squid?" I said, "No." She says, "Come here." And so there was this school of squid. There were at least 20 of them. And if we didn't splash around too much, they slowed down and were curious about us. And at one point, and I would never believe it if I hadn't seen it myself, these squid line up from tallest to shortest, like a little xylophone, and then just stared at us. I'm like, what are we, Lisa, what are they saying? I don't know what they're saying. So just those incredible interactions that you get to have with wildlife was absolutely a huge privilege. So what's great about the southern tip of the Great Barrier Reef is the waters are colder, and so it hasn't experienced the coral bleaching that part of the northern areas of the Great Barrier Reef has. And then it was time to go home. We went home to California, which is also an incredible place for biodiversity, and we also realized we'd missed the entire winter because we left Sonora mid-January and didn't get home until April. So we, of course, decided we needed to visit winter. So some of our friends invited us on a backpacking trip from Yosemite. So we started in the valley, which was kind of like spring, up to May Lake. This is Mount Hoffman above May Lake, which was a wonderful place to come back home and remember, oh yeah, we live in this incredible place, which is also full of incredible experiences. Here's what happened to us on our hike out. So this beautiful brown bear just kind of slowly strolled past us. And it was this great touchstone to remember, like we're surrounded by incredible beauty and incredibly protected places. So there's a place for things like bears to live and make their home. It was an incredible thing to go to circumnavigate the globe. And how it's changed me is I've realized that we're all connected, and not just humans, but we're all connected interspecially, and that we need to make space for each other. And that I have also realized that I can play a part in that. That part of what I was feeling before I left on my sabbatical is I didn't know what to do about anything. I didn't know how to get involved. And going around the globe and meeting so many people that were involved in their own local areas and getting involved in international efforts has made me realize that we can all make a difference, which is a pretty empowering, inspiring thing to feel. Thank you for coming.